Welcome to the Florida Master Naturalist Program, an environmental education curriculum designed to increase awareness and appreciation of Florida's natural resources. Your host is Dr. Marty Main, wildlife ecologist with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Join Marty and his special guests as they take you on a tour of Florida's spectacular natural world.
Florida's coastal zone is critical to seabirds and shorebirds. And there are many issues surrounding the survival of these birds, issues such as habitat loss and human use. Hey Ted, what you looking for?
Oh, I'm looking for some small plovers, some like snowy plovers that nest here, and some like piping plovers who spend the winter here and then go up north and nest up in north.
This is Ted Below. He's been an ornithologist in South Florida for over 30 years. Much of that time he worked for the National Audubon Society, and he's an expert on these shorebirds. Ted, I was just talking about some of the issues that are surrounding the survival of these shorebirds, one of which is, well, human use. Can you tell me a little bit about how that influences these birds?
Well, if you think about it, places like this, for an awful lot of different kind of birds, over 60 species at least, use it regularly. To birds, this is much like a bedroom. This is where they come to rest at high tide when they can't feed. And so they're up here trying to sleep, and it's very much like you trying to go to bed and sleep and have a freight train run through your bedroom every 5 minutes. Because you have people that constantly are going by them, don't often see them even though they've got a face full of them, and disturb them. They get them up, and it is really stressful for the birds because each time they move and fly, they burn energy.
I saw some set-aside areas earlier. Can you tell me how those are designed?
Well, those areas, there's two different kinds. One is for nesting, and the nesting season here is probably 4 months, and from April through, say, July or so. And that's for birds like lease terns and skimmers, mostly. These are birds that nest in large numbers on the beach, and on this spot right here, there used to be 1,000 nests in the nesting season, and now there's none because there's so many people.
Ted, could you show me some of the areas where shorebirds that actually nest here would nest?
Sure, let's go take a look. Snowy plovers, for instance, use these areas that are full of natural trash, and they get spaced out in here, and they don't have a nest, really. What we call it is a scrape. And what it looks like is just they take and do that. And there'll be 3 speckled eggs in there that's almost impossible to see unless you really are looking closely at them. And this is a problem. The same kind of nest and eggs you have for lease terns, and they have 3. And if you can't see them, people walk on them.
I see.
And when the chicks are very small, they don't, in the first few hours, they don't run, and they get stepped on.
Well, let's go take a look at a typical lease tern black skimmer nesting habitat.
Sure thing. So there's a piece right over here. Marty, this is a good example of what lease terns or skimmers would use, the area where there's a little bit of vegetation, and they would just make a scrape. A skimmer scrape would be bigger because it's a bigger bird, and it'll look about like that. A lease tern would be like that. Both of them would have normally 3 eggs. The eggs are all spotted and light tan to sometimes brown, so they're very hard to see, easy to step on, as are the young chicks. And one of the interesting things, I think, is that lease tern chicks, when they dry off, will run. Skimmer chicks, until they're 3 or 4 days over, will hunker down in the sand in a footprint or in the nest and get stepped on.
In addition to terrestrial species, sea turtles also depend on Florida's beaches and coastal dune system. We have 5 species of sea turtles that can be found in Florida waters, these being the Kemp's Ridley, the hawksbill, the loggerhead, the green sea turtle, and the leatherback. But the real story is how sea turtles depend on Florida's coastal beach system for nesting. Turtle tracks in the sand and an excavated depression are indications that a sea turtle nested here last night. With me today is Dr. Lou Earhart, a sea turtle expert and a professor of biology at the University of Central Florida. Lou's been studying sea turtles for nearly 3 decades. How you doing, Lou?
Pretty good. Welcome to the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. We're really pleased to have you here.
Thanks, Lou. Hey, Lou, here's a sea turtle nest. Can you tell me what kind of a sea turtle actually made this nest?
A loggerhead turtle came up here less than 12 hours ago, just last night, and excavated a pit and deposited a clutch of eggs.
How can you tell this was made by a loggerhead?
Loggerhead tracks look different from other sea turtle tracks because of the alternating footfall and because of the distinctive depression that she has scooped out with her front flippers and causing this nice soft mound of sand over the nest itself.
Now, Lou, I was mentioning that we had 5 species of sea turtles here, and you mentioned loggerhead. Which species are the primary nesters?
Well, the loggerhead is, of course, the most abundant nester in Florida as a whole, 60,000 nests a year or so. Then comes the green turtle, where on this beach we may have up to 2,400 nests in a season. And then finally the leatherback, which has just begun to nest in some numbers in the last half decade, and that's the leatherback turtle. But the numbers are still small, but they're rising.
I understand that the Kemp Ridleys and the hawksbill are actually relatively rare here.
There are a few Kemp's Ridleys and hawksbills in the Florida Atlantic waters, but they're quite rare and virtually no nesting at all.
Lou, how many eggs does a loggerhead sea turtle, for instance, typically lay?
If you count a large number of clutches, you'll get an average of about 111 or 112 eggs every year.
Do they lay more than one nest per season?
Yes. Loggerheads, the best number we have is an average of about 4.2 nests per season, but certainly some individuals lay 5, 6, and even 7 clutches at 2-week intervals without mating in the interim throughout the summer.
Now, these sea turtles then are laying a lot of eggs, so the mortality must be pretty high for eggs and nestlings.
Yeah, remember that sea turtles have their appendages modified for swimming, not for getting around on the land. So they don't have the opportunity to get back into the forest or anything upland to hide their eggs. The only choice they have is to put them here in this very dynamic, exposed situation, the beach, which, you know, there could be a hurricane come along and erode this whole area, or mammalian predators, especially raccoons, can find them pretty easily. There's going to be a tremendous loss of eggs, and for that reason, sea turtles lay more eggs than any other kind of turtle, any other kind of reptile, just to account for that loss which is bound to occur.
Right, and then even if the eggs hatch successfully, it's certainly no picnic getting down to the water.
That's the other part of it. And especially after they get in the water, there's a whole suite of predatory fishes in the surf zone, including about 5 species of sharks that just gobble up the hatchlings once they get into the surf. And it's a very important part of the hatchling's behavior to enter into a frenzy in which it swims as hard as it can swim for maybe as much as 2 days to get far out at sea and become a needle in that marine haystack.
As we move south along Florida's coastline, a number of things change. The characteristics of the beach sand change, characteristics of the climate change, and consequently, the characteristics of the plants that grow in the Dune community changes as well. This is Steve Bass. He's the manager of Gumbo Limbo Nature Center in Boca Raton. How you doing, Steve?
Fine, Marty. How about you?
I'm doing great. Steve, let's first talk a little bit about the physical processes of this dune system.
Sure. Our location here in Palm Beach County, like all of the Atlantic coast, is a high-energy shoreline. And characteristic of such systems is a sequence, the beach dune lagoon system, a sequence from the ocean over to the intercoastal waterway or lagoon. And this system taken all together makes up a barrier island.
Right.
Now, we happen to be standing on the spine of the barrier island, the dune top.
It's important to remember too that what happens on the beach forms the substrate for this dune.
Absolutely, Marty. And the makeup of the sand gets transported by the wind up here onto the dune.
Now, Steve, I mentioned that the sand characteristics differ here in South Florida from what we saw in North Florida. Let's take a closer look.
Sure. Marty, you don't even need magnification to see that the sand on this dune top is mostly shell. And of course, when you think about it chemically, this has implications for this whole vegetational community that we find on these dune tops here and further south.
Sure, the availability of calcium.
Absolutely.
There are obviously some other processes that were at play here. Fire.
Fire is an important one. We know from historical photographs that these communities really had fire very often. And another one, of course, are the common factors of high winds from the sea and the salt that they bring with them. Even today, when we have a big storm, we have salt damage on sensitive plants miles inland along this part of the coast.
Right, so these plants are going to be adapted to salt and to these rather harsh growing conditions. What do you say we take a look at a couple of the species?
Perfect.
Steve, this is a very diverse herbaceous community.
Oh yeah, Marty, because of the intense pressures environmentally up here on these dune tops, it's hard for any one plant to dominate.
Pressures such as salt spray.
Exactly, salt spray, just the heat. I mean, surface temperatures can exceed 150 degrees up here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the species we do see. Of course, there's the ubiquitous sea oats.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the taller grasses that we have here. A little shorter than that one are these lighter green Spartina patens.
The ones with the real thin blades.
And then in the openings here on the dune top is a kind of a pioneer grass species, saltgrass.
Steve, of course, we have some showy species as well. I see beach sunflower.
Oh yeah, these dune tops during the growing season are like wildflower gardens. Really wonderful, a great variety of showy flowers. The one we're most concerned about here in Palm Beach County is this one right here, beach jackmatia, sometimes called beach cluster vine. It's a federally endangered species.
And I guess it exemplifies some of the pressures on these systems.
Absolutely. In fact, the reason why it's disappearing is the same reasons that these open dune tops are disappearing too. Habitat change and habitat loss.
Steve, you mentioned habitat loss and habitat change as two major factors threatening these communities. And in terms of habitat change, I see that sea grape is starting to dominate this area.
Yeah, that's right. Again, we know from historical photographs that sea grape was always here on the dune front. But in years past, it was just a knee-high shrub along with other plant species there. With the suppression of fire mainly has come a kind of dominance on the part of sea grape, and it's moving into a role of a canopy dominant.
Now, I can tell from the salt shear on these sea grapes that they're still performing an important function.
Oh yeah, they add to the barrier function of the barrier island.
I see, and of course that's important for our tropical maritime hammocks.
Exactly. They protect the more sensitive species that are characteristic of the hammock from those factors of wind and salt spray.
Along Florida's northeast coast, we have what we call a high-energy shoreline. That's because it's influenced by strong tidal surges and heavy surf, often associated with storms. The beach sand in this area is primarily white quartz, which, strangely enough, originates in the Appalachian Mountains. There are other more minor sources of beach sand, such as coquina ledge outcrops, which may lend an orange tint to the beach. The beach sediment forms the very basis of an important habitat, the dune system. This is the primary dune. And the first thing you notice, at least on the beach side, is that it's highly eroded. That's because erosion is a natural process that influences dune systems. Dune systems are dynamic. That is, they're continually changing. Now let's go up onto the dune system itself and check out some of the things that live there. Hey Janet, what you doing?
Just checking out some of the plants we have here in the dune system for a field trip we've got coming up this afternoon.
This is Janet Zimmerman. She's the education coordinator for the GTM, National Estuarine Research Reserve. Janet, we were just talking about dune systems. Can you tell us a little bit about how dune systems are actually formed?
Well, it's the vegetation that we have here in the dune system that's vital to its existence. The plants in the dunes help trap the sand blowing up from the beach and help it settle out to form the dunes.
Now, the dune system is a difficult place for a plant to live, at least for most plants. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the plants that actually live in the dune systems?
Well, the plants that live here in the dune system have to be adapted to the harsh conditions that we have here. They have to be adapted for heat, the harsh sun, the dry sandy soils that hold little or no nutrients for them.
Wow. Also salt spray.
We have salt spray here as well. Some of the plants that we have back here are the prickly pear cactus that holds its own water in its fleshy leaves. We've got some of the sea oats that provide a great deep root structure to help hold the sand in place. And then we have a variety of different vines back here throughout the dune.
Of course, vines are excellent at colonizing disturbed areas, which I guess a dune system often is.
Exactly.
What about some of the wildlife that live in this area?
Well, we've got a gopher tortoise burrow over here, so why don't you come along and let's check it out. Here it is, Marty. Here's the gopher tortoise burrow.
Oh, yes. Now, do gopher tortoises do really well in this dune system habitat?
They certainly do. They eat a number of the different plants that we see here, including the cactus we talked about.
I see. Now, there's a number of organisms that actually live with the tortoise in his burrow.
That's true. They're commensals. They're roommates. They share his burrow. You might find things like the indigo snake, the gopher frog, or even a rattlesnake.
Now, I understand there's another species here that doesn't live in a gopher tortoise burrow necessarily, but it's actually an endangered species.
We do. We have the Anastasia beach mouse, found only here on Anastasia Island.
And it's uniquely adapted to this environment, I assume.
It is. It's a nocturnal animal that comes out at night in the beach dunes and feeds on the sea oats.
I see. Now, I noticed that as we move from the beach inland, the vegetation starts to change.
It certainly does. We move from the beach dunes that we have here to a scrub habitat, which is a transition zone to the maritime forest.
Our last stop will be in Northwest Florida. We'll be going to St. George Island, where we'll have the unique opportunity to see evidence of the formation and even the movement of dunes across the coastal landscape. We're joined by Roy Ogles, Natural Resource Manager for the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve. And we begin our exploration of this system in the upper beach and foredune zone, where the dune building process begins.
Well, Marty, this is where the dune building process actually starts. These special colonizing type plants that you see along the foredune trap the sand that's migrated up the beach, this wind-blown sand. These special plants, especially the taller ones, lower the wind speed enough so the wind can actually stop and drop and start to form the dunes. This is the most dynamic portion of the beach building process. If we move a little bit further back, conditions become more stable and different plants occur. Marty, you can see we moved behind the dune system, the gulf's over in back of us, to the transition or overwashed plain area.
I see, and this area is quite a bit more quiet than the dune system.
Oh yeah, it's a lot more quiet and more stable. If you notice, there's a lot more herbaceous growth, a lot more species grow here and more densely. There's even pine trees here.
Right, I see a number of different species of grasses, even some sedges and rushes. Now this is slightly lower in elevation than the primary dune.
Slightly lower, retains more water, better conditions for growing in the overwashed plain. If you notice though, in this particular overwashed plain, this section, that some of the dune is actually migrated through due to some storm damage or some other event on the beach.
I understand that you have some management practices you use to try to stabilize a moving dune.
Right, one practice would be to install what we refer to as snow fencing. We use it for sand fencing that actually traps the sand, much like sea oats trap it on the beach. Another mechanism is to simply go in and plant sea oats, lines and lines of sea oats, and that helps stabilize the sand as well.
Now, as we move inland, it becomes increasingly more stable to what the stable dune system is sometimes called.
For the most part, we go back to a more stable and more secure dune system, but that's not always the case. And this is what I'm talking about, Marty. The sand migration here is actually covering this boardwalk. Theory has it that some catastrophic events happened on the beach in the back of us, set this sand in motion, and now it's encroaching over this boardwalk and the pine flightwoods off to our side.
I see. So this catastrophic event could have happened a century ago.
Certainly.
So, and got huge amounts of sand just moving.
Put it in motion, and it hadn't quite stopped yet.
Now I can see that this dune system is just starting to creep across the landscape and has started to encroach upon these pines.
Right. You notice it's actually slowed down here. The back sides of this encroaching dune is actually starting to stabilize. You see the vegetation on it.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that these pine trees have acted much the way that sea oats act on the primary dune or the foredune on the beach. They've actually slowed this dune down.
What about the pine flatwoods? It brings up an interesting point about the maritime forest up here in the Panhandle.
Yep. The maritime forest, typically in the Gulf Panhandle area, is a dune ridge swale system with scrubby component on the tops of old sea dunes or sandbars, and in a freshwater marshy component in the bottoms of the swales. If you notice out here, we've got sawgrass and slash pine trees, and on the tops of the ridges, rosemary, conradina, and other scrub species.
I see. So these are much drier up on top, and so we get our scrub species and more mesic or wet in the swales.
Correct.
Roy, this is a really interesting area, and there's probably some conservation issues that we should mention.
Well, the big one, of course, would be development of the beaches and barrier islands. The barrier islands are exactly that. They're the first line of defense for huge hurricanes or other storm events, the first line of defense for the mainland against the effects of those storms.
I see. And then, of course, there's the general disappearance of this type of community throughout the state.
Right. This coastal scrub, in fact, is a listed habitat in Florida.
And then there are a couple of species that depend upon the beach and the dune systems for their survival as well.
Right. We get nesting shorebirds that prefer the exact types of habitats that this system provides. Also sea turtles. On some of the other barrier islands west of here, beach mice also occur. So it's a really special and unique kind of a place. And this is the only place it exists.
The preceding was a short sample of the curriculum for the Florida Master Naturalist Program series. For more information, visit the Florida Master Naturalist Program website or contact your local University of Florida County Extension office.